Welcome to Water Level. Today we are diving into a detailed analysis of two of the most important reservoirs in the United States, Lake Powell and Lake Mead. These two bodies of water, fed and controlled by the mighty Colorado River, provide drinking water, irrigation, and power for tens of millions of people across the western United States. Every update on their levels tells us more about the state of water in the region, the health of the river system, and the challenges of balancing human demand with environmental needs. The September 2025 readings are now in, and when we compare them against the same time last year in 2024, the results paint a complicated and sometimes concerning picture. Let's take the time to walk through these numbers carefully and break down what they mean in real-world terms. We begin with Lake Powell, the reservoir formed by the Glen Canyon Dam in northern Arizona. As of September 20, 2025, Powell's water level sits at 3,545.81 feet above main sea level. To put that into perspective, the full pool level for Powell is 3,700 feet, which means that the lake is currently about 154 feet below its maximum capacity. This is not just a small shortfall, it is a massive gap that represents billions of gallons of water that are no longer in storage. Even more telling is the daily movement. Powell dropped another 0.16 feet just since yesterday. While a fraction of a foot might not sound like much, when you scale it up across the entire reservoir, it equals a huge volume of water. This daily loss reflects the imbalance between inflows coming into the reservoir and the outflows released downstream to meet water obligations. Now, compare this to September 2024. At this same time last year, Powell was sitting at levels about 3,585 feet, thanks largely to a healthy runoff season and slightly better snowpack. That means the lake is now almost 40 feet lower than it was a year ago. To visualize this, think about a building with 4 floors. Powell has essentially lost that much elevation in stored water compared to last September. This steep drop is not just a reflection of natural variation, but also points to a system under extreme pressure, with inflows not keeping pace with both releases and ongoing drought-driven demand. Switching our attention downstream to Lake Mead, which is held back by the Hoover Dam, the numbers look a little different. As of September 21, 2025, Mead's water level stands at 1,056.81 feet. That puts the reservoir at about 172 feet below its full pool of 1,229 feet. While that is still a very low figure, the trend in Mead over the last few days shows something interesting, a slight rise. Mead gained about 0.08 feet since yesterday. And while again, that may not sound like a dramatic change, in the context of this reservoir, it indicates that releases from Powell and adjustments in water management are giving Mead a momentary boost. When we look back to 2024, Mead was sitting around 1,066 feet at this same point in September, which means today it is about 10 feet lower than it was a year ago. That difference is noticeable, but it is not nearly as dramatic as the 40-foot deficit that Powell has suffered. This tells us that Mead, despite still being far below capacity, has been somewhat more stable than Powell in the short term. One key reason is that Mead benefits from inflows not only from Powell, but also from tributaries downstream. At the same time, water delivery agreements mean that Mead's management often seeks to balance the losses at Powell by stabilizing its own level when possible. The comparison between these two reservoirs is important because they operate in a connected system. Powell sits upstream, and its releases directly feed Mead. If Powell is dropping faster, it eventually puts pressure on Mead's ability to maintain stability. In 2024, both reservoirs showed higher levels overall, largely thanks to a strong snowmelt season. Powell peaked over 3,585 feet in June 2024 before gradually declining, while Mead climbed above 1,075 feet before its own decline. But in 2025, those peaks were noticeably weaker. Powell's rise this spring barely pushed it above 3,560 feet before it began to fall again. Mead, meanwhile, peaked lower and lost its gains faster. The seasonal buffer provided by spring inflows simply wasn't as strong this year, and the result is what we are seeing now in September. Powell at critically low levels, and Mead slightly lower than last year, but holding on better. What these numbers really highlight is the delicate balance of the Colorado River Basin. The snowpack in the Rockies acts like a bank account for these reservoirs, storing water as snow through the winter and releasing it into the river system during spring melt. In 2024, that account was healthier, giving Powell and Mead a stronger starting position. But in 2025, the snowpack was lighter, and hotter summer temperatures led to higher evaporation and stronger water demand. Without the natural cushion of a strong runoff, Powell had little room to resist the steady declines caused by ongoing withdrawals and releases. Mead, while still dependent on Powell, has so far seen more stability, but it too is running lower than last year, a reminder that both reservoirs are connected in their struggle. Another aspect to consider is power generation. Glen Canyon Dam at Lake Powell and Hoover Dam at Lake Mead are both critical hydroelectric facilities. As water levels fall, the capacity to generate electricity is reduced, and if levels drop too far, turbines may even have to shut down. At Powell, the current level of 3,545 feet is uncomfortably close to what is known as the minimum power pool, the elevation at which turbines can no longer function effectively. If the downward trend continues, it could mean serious consequences for electricity supply in the region. Mead also faces challenges, but for now its turbines are less immediately threatened compared to Powell's situation. When we look at the broader picture, the year-to-year comparison underscores the volatility of this system. A difference of 10 feet at Mead or 40 feet at Powell may not sound extreme to the casual observer, but in the world of reservoir management, those numbers represent enormous volumes of water, equivalent to the annual consumption of entire cities. And as population growth continues in the western United States, combined with the ongoing effects of the drought, the pressure on these reservoirs is only increasing. So what does all this mean moving forward? If 2026 is blessed with a strong snowpack, we could see both Powell and Mead climb back up to safer levels, much like we saw in 2024. But if precipitation is weak again, or if temperatures continue to rise and cause more evaporation, we could see further losses that bring Powell even closer to dead pool levels and keep Mead locked in its long-term decline. The system is highly sensitive, and small changes in weather, policy, or demand can have major ripple effects downstream. As we wrap up this analysis, the key takeaway is that Lake Powell and Lake Mead are telling two related but slightly different stories this year. Powell is declining much more steeply compared to last year, showing how vulnerable it is without strong runoff and how quickly it can lose ground. Mead, though still lower than it was in 2024, has remained steadier and even gained slightly in recent days, demonstrating that management strategies can buffer some of the impact, at least temporarily. Together, these reservoirs reflect both the challenges of managing a limited water resource and the urgent need for long-term solutions. The September 2025 readings should serve as a reminder that water security in the American West remains fragile. Every foot lost represents more than just a number. It represents tighter restrictions for farmers, higher risks for power users, and greater uncertainty for millions of people. The comparison with 2024 shows how quickly fortunes can change and how closely these lakes are tied to both natural forces and human decisions. Over the next 20 minutes, as we've seen in this breakdown, the message is clear. The Colorado River Basin remains in crisis, and the paths of Lake Powell and Lake Mead will continue to define the future of water in the West. As we close today's update on Lake Powell and Lake Mead, the numbers make it clear that both reservoirs remain under heavy stress, with Powell showing a sharp decline compared to last year, and Mead holding steadier but still far below capacity. These lakes are more than just statistics on a chart. They are lifelines for millions of people, farms, and industries across the West. Their future depends on careful management, cooperation between states, and of course the snowpack and weather patterns that nature provides. We'll continue monitoring these changes closely, because each rise and fall in water level tells us another chapter of the story.